Hey there, it's Tom Ryan, founder and executive chairman of ICR. Before we get into the next episode, I wanted to ask that you subscribe to the show. It'll help us get even more unique and interesting guests on the podcast, and in turn, continue to educate management teams and the growing ecosystem that creates value for fast-growing private and public companies. And while you're at it, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Very much appreciated.
We are going to run into an advanced manufacturing problem set that we have not seen since the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And here's the worst part. We've abdicated all of that manufacturing prowess to a direct adversary.
When it comes to defense tech, it's not enough to design the best weapon systems. You need to be able to actually build them. Well, one venture capital firm is investing in the infrastructure we need to maintain our military might and preserve our deterrence in a world that's becoming more and more dangerous.
The United States should never have a fair fight ever. So we need to have a manufacturing base that scares the hell out of our adversaries.
My name is Tom Ryan, and this is Welcome to the Arena, the ICR podcast. Each week, I sit down with today's business leaders to give you an inside scoop on some of America's most prosperous public companies, their origins, their challenges, and the keys to their success. Our guest today is Joe Musselman, the founder and managing partner of Bravo Victor Venture Capital. They're a U.S.-based early seed and Series A venture capital fund, and Joe is accountable for the firm's strategic vision and day-to-day mission. He leads all teams at the firm, including capital, investment, portfolio, and fund operations. Joe chairs the investment committee. He also led the firm's formation of Schoolhouse, a VC PE platform that offers 7 experienced dedicated to serving national security founders. Since 2019, Joe has invested in companies like Expo Systems, Firestorm, Epsilon 3, Havoc AI, and notable early breakouts like Anduril and Figure. And importantly for our conversation today, he recently led investments into Union, a new energetics prime where he is co-founder and chairman. Let's enter the arena with Joe Musselman. Tell us about your background prior to Bravo Victor. Where'd you grow up? I know you were in the military. What else did you do leading up to founding that fund?
So the unusual path, more of a lattice than a ladder to get into venture. Grew up in a very kind of lower middle class neighborhood outside of Chicago. My mother was a 41-year public school teacher. My father was a 41-year construction factory worker. A lot of blue collar in my family, not a lot of blue blood.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I would trade it for nothing. It was the most remarkable childhood. I was wealthy in things across the intangibles of great family and love, and definitely privileged to have 2 parents that loved each other and liked each other, and a greater family with all of that. So that's a very traditional Italian-American upbringing in Chicago. My grandfather was a World War II veteran. My father was in the Army during Vietnam, and I was the 22nd man in my family to serve, going all the way back to our country's revolution.
Wow.
So long-standing tradition of military service in my family, which has always been, you grow up seeing every uniform of every branch of every service in every closet. You have the fun intercompetition between, the grandfather Marine, the dad that was in the Army, and then I made them all upset when I decided to go enlisted into the Navy. After I graduated from DePaul University here in Chicago, I went in to submit my package to become a Marine Corps officer. And then I decided to go on this senior kind of thesis trip where it took me to the Middle East, and I visited several countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, notably the 2 that really changed my trajectory in life. It's where I met my first Navy SEAL. And so I came home from that experience, withdrew my OCS package to the Marine Corps, and then enlisted in the Navy with every intention to become a Navy SEAL.
I think you had an injury that prevented you from doing that.
I did.
And how did you kind of get into the world of finance from there?
Yeah, back to the lattice. So I did sustain a spine injury, which prevented me from becoming a SEAL. But in my transition, I asked a very silly question, which was, what happens to a Navy SEAL after they've been a Navy SEAL? And no one could give me a good answer.
Yeah.
So I ended up creating a business that was a career transition institute for Navy SEALs. And it was through that institution building where I was starting to connect with another community with a lot of similarities, both personality and professionally, with the community of the special operations. And that was a community of founders and builders in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So I started to work with teams across different venture funds on something that I love to talk on, which is teams, leadership, and culture, or as my very Italian mother would say, TLC.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I started to meet with some prominent folks in venture that I just didn't know were prominent folks in venture. They were people that I were meeting with to have these kind of deeper fireside, I call it a fifth and a fireside chat conversations about the existential things that really matter in building a company. You know this. It's everything from teams to leadership to culture to principles to ethics to moralities to ethos, all these things. And then one of them said to me one day, you should really launch a fund with this as a kind of guiding operating principle. Whether he was right or wrong, I certainly didn't believe him, that's for sure. But, one thing led to another, one introduction led to another, led to 10, led to 20, led to 50. And so I went on this listening tour in 2018 and 19 where I actually thought, okay, you know what? I can do what they do, maybe. So created a thesis, went to market, raised my first fund of $55 million total under management as kind of a debut fund, fully deployed, obviously, and then went and formed the real national security thesis in 2021 after my investments in Anduril and Crossbow and Tive and some companies that were really focused on a broader national security thesis.
Yeah.
And so that's how I got into venture.
Yeah, I was going to say, after that tour, you're talking with a lot of people in the industry. You must have come to the conclusion that there was a niche out there that just wasn't filled. Is that kind of how you got into defense tech? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't know if that's what you call it, but the national security, the ecosystem, things that make our military stronger and intelligence and all of that. There must have been something missing.
I wish I could say it was some sort of brilliance, and predictive capability that I had. But Jeff at Bedrock, he kind of put me on this track. He's like, wow, you know a lot about this community. I haven't heard much of any of this stuff before.
Yeah.
And we had just co-invested alongside each other in a wonderful company called Epirus. And one thing I realized is that the way big venture, so blue chip venture firms, the Andreessens, the Sequoias, and so on, they have a tendency to track top engineers, right? These top engineers leave Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, UFC, all these big technical schools, and they kind of follow them like a talent board, and they go to Google. And then as soon as they start leaving Google, they pay attention to where they go.
Yeah.
And traditionally, they go from a Google to a smaller new shop that no one's heard of, right? But there must be something there. And so that's a lot of how big blue chip VCs kind of track engineers. I was no different with tracking the special operations engineer, if you will, coming out of the Navy SEAL community and the special operations community. Where are they going? What missions do they find compelling?
Yeah.
And this was very much a chip on my shoulder, right? I didn't get to serve or deploy the way that I'd hoped to as a SEAL. So I saw national security as a way for me to stay connected to the community that I loved. And they share all the characteristics of those kind of founding engineers. But I wanted to follow the operator. And the operators were going into various kind of domains of dominance, as I call them now. But at the time, it was really kind of a right place, pattern matching. It was way more art than science, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we closed our first fund at $100 million. We're well into 50% subscription of our second fund of $100 million. We're doing an early growth fund focused on Europe, Ukraine. So there's a lot of insight now. Now it looks like the cool thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a very serious thing to do. I wouldn't categorize it as a cool thing to do. It's a very serious business to hope to invest in technology that will be protecting warfighters on the ground while they execute very dangerous missions, as we're watching abroad right now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is such a timely conversation. What is fund in the field? I know that's a phrase that you use to describe how you do things. Maybe explain to the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we are Bravo Victor Venture Capital, and I feel very strongly that if any company or any founder can't explain to me the full vision, mission, and value set of the company in their logo, they're doing something wrong. The power of story and narrative is super important when you go to raise dollars and help people understand what you're doing quickly. So look, I recognized one niche for sure, that a lot of funds were having difficulty deploying capital into things that could appear dangerous to LPs. I only wanted LPs that wanted to invest in dangerous things. So I put it right in my title. The Bravo flag pays tribute to my naval service, where when you fly the Bravo flag from a ship, it means that you are carrying dangerous things. Victor, when you fly the Victor flag from a ship, it means that you need help specifically from the outside. And that's what private capital has to do right now. They have to support governments from the outside to help them fund the things in the field that will help them win. And so I wanted to be thought of as a fund in the field, specifically for the hyper-focused on the special operations community, the trigger pullers, the ones who are truly bleeding edge, the ones who are at the very, very tip of the spear. I wanted a fund that represented them, their interests on the ground. And so all of our fellows at the fund are former operators from Tier 1 units, and we've created something very special, and it's doing very well, right? As a fund perspective, our LPs are very, very happy.
You mentioned your LPs. I heard you use the term LP operator. A lot of venture funds take institutional capital. You have high net worth individuals who have a passion for what you're doing and aren't afraid to get involved in many cases, right?
That's right. I would say this, that the United States is requiring some unprecedented leadership right now. A new era of American patriotism is being formed. And what I recognize pretty quickly is, first of all, I'm a family person. I was raised by a massive Italian-American family.
Yeah.
I come from a generational family here in this country that have been laborers. Musselman means man of labor. It's a Bavarian term, going back to my 6th great-grandfather. And I can tell you that every great technological revolution that's ever happened in this country has been funded by families, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Morgans, and so on. So our citizens are the greatest assets, and they love the fact that they've been able to operate a certain way under a certain economic principle of capitalism. And they are visionary, they are grateful, and they want to invest in things that are protecting the warfighter that is allowing them the freedom to operate in this economic system. So I want to recruit families. Yeah, I'm not saying I'm anti-institution at all.
Yeah, of course.
But the families definitely deserve for what they've built, for how they think, how quickly they can move, and just personality-wise, it's a match. I really love working with great American families.
Yeah. How do you define defense tech? I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with the companies that you're meeting with and investing in, a lot of people might think, oh, it's software, then government uses it and whatever. Like, what are they misunderstanding and what's included in the ecosystem there that people might not appreciate?
So I don't define the fund as a defense fund at all. I only use the term national security because, just to use quick examples, we didn't think that Facebook or Amazon or Google at time of inception was going to become a national security company.
Yep.
Right? But they certainly are, and we all know why. In the last couple of years, we've seen the impact that they have on everything from an electorate to data and privacy of the American people and our data and us being sold as a product. So I would say that national security is a very broad mandate, right? There are founders right now that are focusing on next generation problem sets that have enormous commercial markets. Now, top funders and founders want to work with BVVC because they understand who we represent. We represent the bleeding edge of ideas that are tested by warfighters at the very front lines. When you think about this fund, you should think about it, number one, everything we invest in is AI-driven, into 3 big categories of investment: software, hardware, and advanced manufacturing. And the majority of our businesses are building things you and I can touch, right? They're not building up in a cloud.
Yeah.
They're building right here on Earth with concrete, tonnage, and steel. So these are companies that are additive manufacturing. These are companies building autonomous systems, new energy solutions, everything from advanced compute to hypersonics to microelectronics, directed energy to space technologies. These are what I would consider to be national security companies, and even some of the advanced robotics companies that we've invested in, watching Brett and Figure just, scale the hell out of this concept when the world really needs, to change the way that we think about labor and the workforce. It's a massive market. It's a $6 trillion TAM. That's the way we've just defined it from day one.
Yeah. Do you think the typical tech VC has the ability to kind of size up a technology in terms of its impact on national security or its ability to be deployed into the Department of Defense and the commercial sector? That has to be a pretty narrow skill set.
Yeah, that's another great question. I will tell you that there will be billions of dollars wasted on the wrong companies and the wrong ideas, for sure, whether it's the AI boom or even now national security.
Yeah.
You do have to deeply understand it to be a true insider. So I can tell you that we are used a lot by larger funds on the diligence side and asking us how we think about things, how we think through problem sets through a lens specific to national security. We only invest as a fund into decabillion-dollar outcomes, meaning if there is not a decabillion-dollar outcome into the DOW or a decabillion-dollar outcome into the commercial sector, the market is simply not big enough for us. So these are big ideas going after very big markets. If people at bigger funds categorize them as national security, that would be for them to consider. But I would say that it's very difficult to have a first-in foothold in the top teams building inside of this industry, entering into the largest markets before everything gets saturated. We were lucky to be here in 2020, 2021, 2022, and those vintages of ideas and problem sets that were coming out are now reaching scale, and they've survived, and they found ways to thrive. So it is a unique niche, for sure. It's not something you can adapt and just kind of attach to your fund. You need to have some real kind of breadcrumbs coming from this industry and sector to help inform you as to what's right and what's wrong. This is where everyone at this fund has lived and breathed, almost their entire professional career. So giving them and those types of community top talent a place to land, it's made us incredibly unique.
I had an interesting question about, kind of the national security complex, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the biggest constraint is on success there? Capital, technology, or is it like industrial capacity, and why?
So I would say this. I raised the first fund during COVID, when every single person in finance told me, do not raise a fund during COVID, let this kind of blow over, whether it was my stubbornness or my naivete or just straight up ignorance, being like, look, I could either have a fund when I get out of COVID, or I will just be starting to raise a fund like everybody else after COVID. I know everybody's in their living room, right? So I know where all the money is going to be, and it's in their home. So they're going to need to still talk to managers. They're going to need to still deploy capital.
Yeah.
So the reason why I bring that up is because great builders know how to build things despite the circumstances. So when you talk about challenges, or you talk about the quote unquote valley of death that I hate when people talk about the valley of death of resources for defense companies, every founder has a trough of sorrows. They all go through this moment where capital is constrained and they have to get creative.
Yeah.
So for us, the real constraint was what I call the elegant decay of talent for so many years that used to be very excited to go work for the three letters and for the defense agencies and the branches. And now we're seeing that resurgence, right? It's usually talent constrained, but this is highly unique talent, which is why we've built a 10,000 person community of talent, of folks in transition into this sector. And it's no different than navigating any other complex system. There are fintech funds out there that know how to navigate big banks.
Yep.
Right? Now there's national security funds that know how to navigate the big government. It's really no different. It's just finding the creativity, the initiative, the execution kind of strategy and roadmap to go out there and do it successfully and quickly.
I mean, I would think every company who's raising capital that has a promising future would want you in the cap table, because you do bring something different, I think, to the table versus everyone else, right?
Yeah, we think so. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course. You've dealt with a lot of founders. What do you think they usually underestimate their first time they try and manufacture at scale, or have a brilliant idea or a technology, and you're kind of helping them along? Where do you see the pitfalls?
Yeah, years ago, we saw this with builders. So like I said, 90+% of our portfolio are building things in the physical world that you and I can touch and see, right? So with that comes an entirely new sector of finance that they have to learn how to blend on the cap table.
Yeah.
Right? So we're learning this in real time at Union. I'm seeing builders that were coming out the gate. Just yesterday, we had a call with a rare earth mining and refining company. And they somewhat kind of casually talked about, raising about 100 to 150 to go build this factory and facility. And I am the eternal optimist. I believe that people can do what they say, but you got to work a plan, right? And you got to have a plan to work. So it really then becomes, I believe you, entrepreneur founder, that you're going to go raise $100+ million. Now, walk me backwards from the moment you've raised it. Tell me what you did to do it. Who did you talk to? Big commercial banks? How much is debt? How much is venture debt? How much is equipment financing? How much is equity? And what are you using the equity for? All of these types of new questions, right? So think about it. These are technologists, right? These are not people that have had to staff up a 24-hour factory operation through 3 shifts of 50+ workers, blue collar, white collar. This is a different talent game.
Totally.
Right?
Oh my God.
So that's the stuff that I think is underestimated, which is why we stole all of our engineers from Tesla, Anduril, SpaceX, NASA, MIT, because they've been doing this physical building stuff and these ideas for a long time, for nearly 3-4 decades.
Joe briefly mentioned Union, one of his newer ventures. I asked him to delve into the thesis behind the company and why it could be such a game changer for defense tech startups.
So Tom and Joe, back in the 1940s and 50s, we would walk down Main Street. We'd go into a savings and loan. We'd say, we want to build a factory. We want a loan. This is what we're going to build. Here's our financials. Give us that loan. We go build the factory. We go build the things. And, we're profitable and it's a very successful business. Welcome to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in America, right? America forgot how to forge steel. We forgot how to build factories. We're seeing this right now. No one in the world fears the United States turning on their factories anymore because they don't exist. Yeah. Right? This is a huge problem. I saw it with my founders saying, look, Joe, I built this one thing, right? I built a thing. Yep. The government's going to pay me $20 million to go build 100 more of the things. And then my question was, okay, well, how do you build 20,000 of those things? Insert awkward pause.
Yeah.
Right. And then they tell me how they're going to reimagine supply chains and, do all these glorious things. And I'm like, Mr. Stanford graduate, you are brilliant, but that is unrealistic in this moment in time. Right. So it became obvious to me on this listening tour from my own portfolio of builders, right, that, man, when we get to 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 of the thing, we are going to run into an advanced manufacturing problem set that we have not seen since the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And here's the worst part. We've abdicated all of that manufacturing prowess to a direct adversary over the last half century.
It's insanity.
So this is a big problem, right?
Yeah.
And it turns out to be a multi-trillion-dollar TAM problem because what we came up with in 2021, 22, we started to hear this problem set. We developed the thesis 2023, 2024. Okay, here it is. We need to go to market with our first build company of the fund. And that company is called Union. We build factories as a stockpile. We don't just need to stockpile weapons and guns, munitions, all this stuff. We have to stockpile factories that build things at scale. So at Union, we build factories for the West to deter our adversaries forever. This is the thesis, guiding thesis of the company. We've attracted 53 families to date to move to Dallas to work on this project. We have built Factory 1 in record time with record numbers. And most importantly, we've raised a blended cap table of nearly $100 million to date. And we will be the first privately owned, privately run, non-GoCo, so not government owned. We are a CoCo. We're corporate owned, corporate operated. And we are the first venture-backed factory in the history of this country to produce the 155 metal part shell. So it's the most advanced metal part factory on the planet. We can do all variants of the 155, the 1128, the 1208, the 795, the 107. We can do everything down to tank rounds, even a 120.
Wow.
So the adaptability and the agility that this factory can do proved a lot of people wrong, proved us right, thankfully. And now that's just Factory 1. So we are now mapping factories 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on, that will all be building in the direction of securing the industrial base of the United States and our allies.
Does owning manufacturing capacity change how you underwrite some of these startup deals, like defense or hardware startups? Does that give you an inherent advantage in valuation, or how do you think about that?
Look, we're not building for 21st century here. We're building for 22nd century. The United States should never have a fair fight ever.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to have a manufacturing base that scares the hell out of our adversaries. Straight up, that is the truth.
Yeah.
And so when I think of underwriting companies, we had something in our PPM which was very unusual to most LPs when they saw it, that 50% of our companies must impact 50% of our companies, right, with their products. So the idea for Union is, look, I'm an inception seed investor. I have all these companies that are building very young companies, and when they get through their growth, they're going to have to manufacture at scale. I wanted to build a manufacturing prime that could support that thesis, right? So as my own companies in my portfolio are growing, we now have a company called Union that can help them build their factory.
Yeah.
Right? These builders and thinkers should not be worried about, the factory build. They should be worried about the technology that the factory is pushing out. So if I can relieve that burden, it would be one of the most effective ways to underwrite companies, the fact that we also have a company that can help them manufacture at scale.
I was going to ask you about AI. How do you think it impacts national security? Do you think it will create distance between the U.S. and our adversaries? Or do you think it levels the playing field because any country or entity, let's say, can have like an AI-powered drone and, fly it from 1,000 miles off the coast or something? Like, how do you think about AI and all this?
Yeah, the AI question is a big one.
So confusing.
But here's the thing. Again, back to my point that the United States should never have a fair fight ever.
Yeah.
And, I grew up with my grandfather telling me stories, and I grew up with, obviously I entered the Navy SEAL community meeting warfighters who, when they showed up and knocked on a door in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, wherever they were, you messed up, right? If you had an operator land on your roof and you got a door knock, you done something wrong, okay?
Yeah.
And now the fear and the audacity and the boldness of our adversary says that we've lost just a slight edge on that. So here's what's determined every single war in the last 100 years. Industrial power determined all world wars. It was industrial power of President Roosevelt reaching out to Ford and GM and Chrysler and saying, hey, stop making refrigerators, cars, and toasters and start making weapons, bombs, ammo, and planes. We won the world. The United States gave the world back to the world for the first time in humankind history. And then we went on to the greatest deterrent ever, which was nuclear power and nuclear weapons. That created deterrence. That was the longest standing deterrent in the history of the world, was in fact creating nuclear weapons. Now we're moving into these things like precision weapons and GPS-defined, AI-defined modern warfare, where even in Ukraine, we're seeing a 22nd century air operation taking place with a 19th century, 20th century ground operation taking place, right? And they're meeting in the middle. So now that we are entering a period where AI determines kind of who can understand, decide, act faster than their adversaries, AI becomes the operating system of modern defense. It's a clear framework that gives us decision advantage. It helps guide autonomous systems. It guides cyber and information warfare. And what we've done at Union is we've created Fabric Faction, Overmind, and then Overlord. Obviously, these were named by some pretty serious people. And to kind of self-declare in the product themselves on how do we make factories adaptive, intelligent, and continuously improving. And then it's the real strategic shift of the classic OODA loop, right? We're observing, we're orienting, we're deciding, and we're acting. So these are the things that will determine on how AI is used, but we just cannot. AI is the race that we lose our country.
I totally agree. I mean, and the use cases for that, robotics, et cetera, like we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
What categories of defense or industrial tech do you think are like overhyped right now or maybe underappreciated?
Well, there's one in particular that's both. It's both overhyped and underappreciated at the same time, and there's no clear winner. We know that we have a superior product at Union. We're not saying there aren't other good products.
Yeah, of course.
But there are very few factory software products that have been built alongside building a factory, whether it be greenfield or brownfield. You hear a lot of people coming out with these different layers of factory software. But if you and I were to walk into any factory, 9.9 times out of 10, Tom, we're going to see a lot of clipboards and no dashboards, right? We're going to see a lot of manpower around a single cell. Our factories at Union can be controlled from Palo Alto or Singapore. It doesn't matter, right? So we can turn things on, turn things off, start getting real on-the-ground intelligence as a result of Fabric Faction Overmind. And so we're very proud of the engineers. Adam Hoke is brilliant. What he and his team have done at Union as our head of software. Our CEO, Garrett, has been a wonderful leader. But for us, that's one sector that we think is wildly overhyped but underappreciated for the builders that are out there building. They need to be very precise about what factory software they choose to implement.
I've heard you say that the investments in defense tech over the next 10 years is really going to determine our country's security and success over the next 50 years. Maybe just give a comment around that, because I think it's, given what's going on in Iran and Venezuela and everywhere, the world is changing very rapidly. I think that's like a really great observation. Tell me your thoughts around that.
What I say as much as I possibly can in any platform that I can, and I rarely do pods and I rarely do panels. There are much more talented people that I would love to recommend than me, but our relationship is very important. And the work that we're accomplishing together is very important. It matters to the builders. And so I want to make sure that people recognize that for what you've done, for what the company has done, and for how you're supporting warfighters. So that's the first thing. The next thing I would say is by the end of this decade, we will have come to a moment in our history. I don't think people understand that or fully grasp, I shouldn't say understand, but fully grasp what is happening around us. We have an ongoing conflict on the ground in Ukraine.
No one's talking about it anymore, but it's there.
But it's there. And it's funny, look at while you watch the right hand, watch what the left hand is doing. So there's tremendous negotiations going on at the State Department level right now between Russia and Ukraine because there's a moment of silence where they can focus on it. And the same thing, let's go back a little bit further. The reason why I say by the end of this decade, it'll determine the next 50 years, these 10 years will determine the next 50, is we think of all of these things as test beds. You cannot test technology in labs in Silicon Valley. It doesn't fucking work. You can't manufacture the stress of a real-time warfight in a lab in Silicon Valley. So what did we do? Well, look, we had a bad actor in Venezuela. Well, let's go take that guy out and let's use some new tech the world didn't know we had. All right? Yeah. Success. By the way, at the same time, we basically cut off all China's reserves into Venezuela in one fell swoop. So now they're in trouble. Well, let's go mess with the next big challenge, we need to put targeting systems. And like I said earlier in the podcast, the precision weapons and GPS-defined modern warfare, that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Autonomous systems, drones, robotic vehicles, all these types of things. We're showing our sea power and the way that we can coordinate around the world, digital deception, information, operations, cyber defense, automated vulnerability discovery. All these things matter. Offense and defense in cyber all at the same time is an operation that's going on right now in and around Iran. So all of this is, basically not for show. This is a real-time exercise of the industrial power of the United States, and that we are still unmatched in many ways. Do we have vulnerabilities? Of course. Do we want to have a hard conflict with China? God, no. Okay, no one wants that to happen. But I'll tell you one thing, we're being watched very closely by our adversaries right now on how we think, act, feel, communicate towards an adversary, how we run, gun, and communicate on the ground, in the air, and the sea. If we don't come out of this decade winning AI, the next 50 years will be very
unpleasant.
Well, actually, it's the fog of war. No one will be able to tell us what it looks like. And I'll tell you one thing, we haven't seen superintelligence yet, because when we see superintelligence, we will see a headline that says, cancer is cured, hunger protein discovered, famine never again, right? Like when we start seeing headlines like that, we should start to understand that, oh man, superintelligence has arrived and it found stuff that we have been looking for a century, and we haven't found it, and they found it in a year and a half. So that's when we really need to figure out who owns what, who's operating what, who has the control systems to what, and we can't lose. We just can't lose.
That was Joe Musselman, founder and managing partner at Bravo Victor Venture Capital. Joe and his team are dedicated to making early investments in the acceleration of proven technologies that matter the most to national security. And I think importantly, Joe and his team just don't bring money to the table. They bring real expertise and mentorship to founders. Since 2009, this approach has not only led to successful investments, but strengthened our nation, which we are eternally grateful for. I'm Tom Ryan. We'll see you next time, back in the arena.
References to specific stocks are not intended to be recommendations for specific trading behavior. Comments presented on this podcast are intended for informational and educational purposes only, and do not represent opinions or recommendations on whether to buy, sell, or hold shares of a particular stock. All investors are advised to conduct their own independent research into individual stocks before making a trading decision. In addition, investors are advised that past stock performance is no guarantee of future price performance.